Hello everybody and welcome to this discussion on the commodity cycle, and absorbing the commodity shock is the topic of today's discussion. My name is Bruce Whitfield and I am from a very fortunate country in South Africa where the commodities boom that we've enjoyed over the last couple of years has helped South Africa's fiscal position very, very much. But are we coming to an end of this commodities boom? We've got a fantastic panel for you today who are going to take us through this. There's also an opportunity for you to ask your questions, and you can do it in one of two ways. You can do it by using Slido, and Slido is much easier than you would think. You'll see a QR code coming up there. You know how it works by now. Please capture the Slido, and we'll also ask you some questions, which I think is important as well, to kick off our conversation. So if you don't have the Slido app loaded yet, please do, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Right next to me is Anil Agarwal, who is the founder and executive chairman of Vedanta Resources. He is a massive producer of, is it aluminium? That's the proper way of pronouncing it?
Yes.
Or is it the other stuff, aluminum?
You know, it depends which country you are. So,
we're here.
You know, if you're in France, it's a different pronunciation. But aluminum.
Oh, you're doing the American way. Aluminum. We'll do aluminum for the World Economic Forum. And next to him, we've got Arantxa Gonzalez, who is the Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs. She has spent many years in international affairs, including representing the Spanish government in various positions. We've also got from Peru, the Minister of Economy and Finance, Oscar Graham. Good to have you here, Minister. Nice to have you. And next to him, Benedict Sobotka, who is the CEO of Eurasian Resources Group. It's a natural resources group, 15 countries, 80,000 people, and critically, in this particular discussion, also co-chair of the Global Battery Alliance. And then next to him, finally, we've also got the Muhammad Lufti, who is the Minister of Trade from Indonesia. So a high-powered panel for all of you. Before we ask our panelists this question, I'm going to ask it of you first. If we get the first question up on Slido this morning, we'd like to take the temperature of the room, if we can, and that is whether or not we're even in a commodities crisis at all. I wonder how the room is going to feel about it. The writing is nice and small. In your view, which of the following statements is most accurate? We are in a commodities crisis. We are yet to get into a commodities crisis, but it is coming. And the writing gets smaller after that. There we go. We are going into a commodities crisis. I cannot see that we're in a crisis. The room seems to think we are divided. Excellent. We do like a good bit of division. We'll give you another moment or two for those of you who have got Slido to participate and answer that question. But I think, yeah, there's an overwhelming sense of being in a crisis. If it is not, we're not yet in a crisis, certainly it is ominous and looming. Anil Agarwal, would you agree? Are we in a commodities crisis?
No, there's no crisis. Yeah, the price goes up and down. That's a different thing. You breathe in, you breathe out. So this goes up and goes down. But there's no crisis. Of course, geopolitical situation is creating disturbance. Prices are gone very high because people always thought that the mining is not a great thing. But today they realize there is very important above the earth and below the earth. Both are as important for human life, but with the sustainability. Okay. Is important.
Absolutely. His daughter is an environmentalist who is brought into the company, who gives him a very hard time about mining and its impact on the world. Arantxa, your view on the global commodity cycle?
Well, we are at a moment of hypervolatility, whichever way we want to denominate this hypervolatility, and this is essentially the product of four factors. Obviously, one big one, Russia's war in Ukraine. Number two, pre-existing difficulties on the logistics produced basically by the absorption of the COVID shock. Number three, limited investments in many sectors. And number four, expanded demand in the same sectors where investments had been short of demand. So what we have is a hypervolatility. This has many dimensions. We can look at minerals, but we also have to look at food, because food is people. Yeah, hypervolatility, need to find ways to cushion it.
Absolutely. And there was a report out today that dividend payments from companies worldwide are sitting at record levels because money is being paid back to shareholders and not being reinvested. And that is very concerning. Minister Graham, from a Peruvian perspective, large extractive resources economy and heavily dependent, of course, on global commodity prices. How are you feeling?
Yes, well, we have a mix of effect because on one side we have the rise of the international price of copper, which represents more than 50% of the exports. But on the other hand, we are net importer from oil and wheat and corn. So we are this mixed effect. We are taking money from the income from the copper, and we are using to redirect to social programs. Because in this situation, it's a complex international situation, the rise in food affects of the people with lower incomes. So we need to focus the measure of policy in this sector. And we have this mix of effect in Peruvian economy.
Thank you. Benedict Sobotka, you are in some of the more challenging economies in the world, operate in places like Zimbabwe, the DRC, and others. What's your perspective on where we are in this commodity cycle? Are we in a crisis or not, as Anil suggests?
Well, I guess I'll take the contrarian view here, and I think we're at the beginning of what I would call the biggest purchase order in history for our industry. At the same time, it's got all the ingredients for a perfect storm. The time of cheap commodities is over, because commodities, and I'm talking about mainly minerals and metals, they're more expensive because they require energy, and as energy costs increases, mining cost increases. At the same time, we have come out of this last 10 years of cheap commodity prices with a tremendous underinvestment in new resources, and that is going to haunt the industry. And at the same time, that's why I call it a perfect storm, ESG requirements make it incredibly difficult to increase production because permitting times increase. You've got all the ingredients for a perfect storm. The time of cheap commodities is over for the long term.
Thank you for that perspective. And then Minister Lufti from Indonesia, your perspective, if you would.
Well, I try to summarize everything. The answer is, what crisis? On the Indonesian perspective, this volatility, I think, created a perfect springboard for innovations. Innovations follows by investment. And investment for countries like mine is very important because we are in a country in a run. We're in a country in a hurry. We try to skip the middle income trap right away. We try to skip the middle income trap that we need to triple the GDP from today to 2030 by 3 times, from 4,000 to 12,000. And then also to skip from middle income trap, we need to do 2 things: investment and also transfer of technology. So this is a perfect springboard for a country like Indonesia that is innovations followed by investment. And because of that, I think if there is no volatility, if there is no price hike, there is no innovations. People don't try to do anything. Indonesia, a country with 3.5 million barrel oil equivalent a day. We need 1.5 million. The only problem is 2.5 million comes from coal. So EV battery, lithium battery, and EV cars is a must for Indonesia to survive. And because of that, we will be the powerhouse of this invention, will be the powerhouse for these innovations, and will be the powerhouse for this investment. In the next 10 years, we're going to jump up our classes from that basis, and we have to thank this commodity volatility today.
But the issue of underinvestment in development, Benedict, let's go to you on this one, in terms of there is huge demand, there is no shortage of demand, and that's going to drive up prices, and hence your point. But can the global resources sector cope with the demand that is coming from, you're deeply connected to the batteries industry worldwide? Is the resources industry geared for it?
Not in the time span that is expected from our industry. If I read the forecasts of the World Bank and other very reputed institutions, they're anticipating the demand in some of the materials that we produce, for example, cobalt, to triple in the next 10 years. I mean, that is an underestimation, because last year the demand increased by 20% in 1 year. because of electric vehicles. So if you translate this into other sectors, it's an incredible wave of demand that's coming that's incredibly difficult to supply. And I think it's what we don't see is how wasteful the demand is. So resources that are predominantly being consumed today in the developed countries and China, and I'll come to that point about that it's actually what is good for the developed industry is actually is not good for the developed economies, actually very good for the developing economies because enormous wealth is being transferred. Not too loud for the developing economies. But the demand is incredibly wasteful. To give you just one number, per year, there's about 50 million tons of electronic waste being thrown away. 50 million tons. 17% of that is being recycled. And I look at every one of you, I'm sure every one of you has got 4 or 5 mobile phones in their drawers.
7.
We're all guilty of that. Without circularity, our industry is not going to be able to cope, and that means higher prices, more inflation for consumers in the developed world.
Isn't there a virtuous cycle, though, in terms of as demand is created and supply wanes, more supply comes on, and then as supply exceeds demand, then that's the cycle, isn't it? Where are we in this cycle?
Well, we believe that we're probably at the first 10% of probably what is a 20-year or 30-year cycle. The energy transition, we believe, is, as I said, the biggest purchase order for our industry. It will trigger $50 trillion of investment in the next 30 years. That's $1.5 trillion per year. That's the entire mining industry every year. Every year we have to double this industry to do this kind of investment that's required for the energy transition. It's never been there. And looking at the valuations of some of the mining companies and the commodity companies in the stock market, they're miniature compared to the size of the global industry.
Yeah.
Right? What's the total global economy? 1.5 trillion is the global mining industry. It's a fraction of what it's actually worth in terms of value creation for the world. So it needs to get a lot more attention, and it needs to get a lot more investment also from external investors, which we're not seeing. The industry is very unpopular.
We'll get to that unpopularity in a moment. Anil, in terms of the commodity sectors, though not every commodity is created equal. There's certain demand, particularly in the battery space. And I was talking to the chief executive of Intel yesterday, who was saying currently they use 60% of the periodic table to create semiconductors, and they're looking at ways of utilizing the remaining 40%. Where is the demand going to be? What particular commodities do you see as being in huge demand? Aluminium is no doubt one of them.
Yeah, there are two sides of it. One is the normal commodity, which we talk about, copper, zinc, aluminium. These are mass production. And as a battery, you need a cobalt, you need, which is probably 5% of this massive. Yeah. Which is most important because this is how they're creating the battery segment. You know, I can talk about my country, India. 1.4 billion people. Out of 5 people, there is 1 Indian. So in this, you will not believe when I give you the number. 60%, 60% goes in import of the metal and oil below the ground. And India, most of the money goes. We don't produce copper. We have the highest copper reserve. We don't produce gold. We have the highest reserve of gold. We don't produce silver. We have the highest reserve of silver. Nickel, iron ore, everything we being import. Coal, probably 3rd largest in the coal, because as it says, mining was a little bit unpopular.
Yes.
It was unpopular, and the value creation was not there. So the new investment, as you said, that the kind of investment, I think largest investment physical, the job creation and the prosperity of any nation. And today is a time, I'm the mining man, I have seen the environment is better after you do the mine because the technology has come far ahead.
Arantxa, and that's maybe the problem, is mining is increasingly technologically driven and people feel marginalized around the world in terms of mining. Mining has got to be seen, I suppose, as to be a really important corporate and social citizen.
Yeah, I mean, when I listen to this conversation, I think all roads lead to sustainability.
Yep.
And this is a key word that we have to associate to commodities, whether it's sustainable mining, whether it's energy efficiency, or whether it's food production. Let's not forget the food part of the commodity story, because that is a really serious one. Is about hunger, and hunger is about people. And there too, what we are seeing is a distribution of food production that is very affected. I mean, we are not short of food in the world. It's just that it's highly impacted by climate and not very well distributed. So all roads lead to sustainability. And number two, if we're talking about food, we have to care about international trade rules and keeping markets open. International trade has been part of the solution. So avoiding trade bans, export restrictions that are going to make these markets really suffer and prices go up. We've seen food prices go up by 7 percentage points just by the adoption of export restrictions on cereals. This sustainability, keep markets open, are two big considerations.
How then, Mr. Graham, do you, as Peru, as a big commodity producer, satisfy the demands of industry and satisfy the demands of a rapidly growing world in terms of population and economy and value, and at the same time really apply yourselves to the question of sustainability when it comes to digging big holes in the ground?
Well, let me back to the, I think that we have, in the short term, we have a serious problem with food. Because, if we take into account that the price of fertilizer has risen extremely high, and this is causing also a high inflation. The world is suffering the high inflation in decades. And also, we have a rise in interest rates around the world, and we are at the brink of stagflation. So I agree that in every crisis we have the opportunity for innovation, but in the short term, very short term, we have a serious problem.
I'd like to, if I may, there are lots of discussions here at Davos about food and about food shortages and food supply, and Joseph Stiglitz yesterday was saying there isn't, the inflation problem when it comes to food. Inflation's not going to solve, raising interest rates not going to solve the problem. Simply get global supply going, and we can resolve much of world hunger at the moment. But can we please focus in on mining commodities and the risks associated with mining commodities, because I think that's what we've been asked to do right here. As a big exporter of minerals, how do you ensure a sustainable mining industry 50, 100 years from now that doesn't destroy the fabric of Peru and ensures that the industry that Benedict wants to see supported is supplied with the commodities, copper in particular? Well,
really, right now we have a problem of social conflict in mining activity, because the mining activity is not giving the benefit to the population in the influence zones of mining. We've seen government in Chile, very prosperous economy, great commodities economy. We've seen the politics change there very significantly, haven't we? Yes, and this is playing in part more because the lack of the capacity of administration from the government, because we have enough resources, but we didn't have enough capacity to apply and to build social infrastructure. So, one hand we have the sustainability of the mining activity, and on the other hand we have the conflict, social conflict in this area. So, Peru has a huge reserve of minerals, but we don't have too much new projects in exploration, and we are not taking advantage of this super cycle of minerals. Mr. Lufti, I mean, you wanted to triple your economy by 2030. That is a lot of consumption. That is a huge amount of demand. Can the world, is the world geared to support your growth or your growth ambition?
Well, I don't know about the world, but I want to continue what the minister from Peru says. If we just rely on selling a basic commodity, the country cannot sustain. I guarantee you that. But I want to tell you a story. I don't want to name the commodity. We stopped the export of one commodity. We got about 1.1 billion in 2019 selling that one commodity. We stop it. We force people to make a value additions of that. We created stainless steel. Suddenly, Indonesia became #2 stainless steel producer in the world. Do you know how much the multiplications? $10.86 billion that very year after. Double that in 2021 to be 21 billion. This year will be 10% of Indonesian export coming from stainless steel. The recipe is value added. Like my friend says, when the developing country created something, the developed country is not happy. So right now, I'm having a dispute settlement with the developed countries almost like every other day. But for Indonesia, we have no choice but fight it.
Would it be wrong to call that a little bit of resource nationalism, if you like, withholding supply
I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
To beneficiate?
I don't want to hear it.
To beneficiate that.
Do you know that at one point, the European had 3.7 more vaccine than they need, okay? And they sent it back to countries like Indonesia 2 weeks before expiration date. I don't want to hear it.
But where the rest of the world is going to feel threatened by you.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, it's about national interest, you know. But we are a democratic country. I have 270 million people hungry, okay? And the worst part is social media. Oh my God, they're so loud. And I need to cater that. As much as the European need to cater the Europeans, as much as other developed countries to cater the developed countries. So this is a fight of democracy to sustain the very fabrics of survival. So Minister, trust me, you have to do what Indonesia does. If you want it, I'll show it to you. I'll come to your country.
It's one of the great issues that commodities suppliers, producers have all around the world is extraction and export, and then import at considerably higher cost, of course, and beneficiation is...
Do you know what they call that? Colonialism.
That's what it is, absolutely. Absolutely. But Arantxa, I mean, this is, again, such an interesting deviation in terms of the structure of the global economy into the future. Countries putting their economies and their people first. And we saw that with, for example, the vaccines, with core materials for vaccines being withheld by certain countries. We're going into quite a fractious time, it would seem.
Well, I guess you can, the basic system in which we live is one where you can pursue your national interest and still be an open economy. The two are not contradictory. That you can do more value added at home, like the minister wants to do in Indonesia, but you don't need to close your economy to do that, because you're going to need a little bit more. Excuse me, but I think we're going to need a little bit more than just simply withholding the commodity so that the local producer transforms it for this to be the real value added that you want. That may be the first step, but we are going to need a little bit more than that. We're going to need investments in education, in infrastructure, in innovation, and that will be better served if the economy is an open economy. So my guess is that you can build value added, and I think it is very good that countries want to do value added, especially countries that are dependent on exporting a single commodity. Yeah. And that's a risky business, so resilience means more value added, but I guess you can do this value added without closing your economy. With an open economy, with an open international trade, you can also do that.
Absolutely, Professor, absolutely. Because we cannot close the economy. And you know, I gather the ASEAN, I don't know if people knows that ASEAN is the Southeast Asian countries, the unity of 10 countries. You know, I called for a special economic minister to make sure that our economy is open and to make sure that Indonesia, as the biggest population there with 270 million people, be the catalyst to make sure that trade is happening. But value-added investment, transfer of technology, only the recipe for middle-income countries like mine. There is no other ways to do it. So then, if the United States can come back and says that steel industries are their national interests. So does some European countries. For Indonesia, it's a survival.
Benedict Smoker, what do you make of the conversation so far? I see you being quite bemused and restrained.
No. I really enjoy the energy and passion. I think it's very good. Every country should be patriotic, and it should be patriotic in a realistic way, because quite often the reason why it's very difficult to integrate downstream is because you need skills that may not be available at that time, and you need investment, long-term investment, and that also means you need quite often international investments into those countries. And not every country, I don't know Indonesia very well, but many countries don't have all these ingredients in place. I mean, just to give an example, we talk about the mobile phone a lot and about how important and how big an industry it is. A mobile phone costs about $1,000, let's say, a good modern phone. And the materials inside, they only cost about $180, right? So $700, $800, $20 is actually created not with the manufacturing of that equipment, which means, and then the battery is only $3, and then the cobalt is only 40 cents. So, of course, that phone wouldn't exist with the cobalt coming, for example, out of the DRC or out of Australia. But a lot of the value add happens outside of the countries that produce the materials without which these end products wouldn't exist. And of course, that's a global imbalance that's very difficult to explain to emerging economies, and why shouldn't they take that $820 at some way or the other? So I think it's the right discussion. It just needs to be, I think it should be not a political discussion, but it should be a discussion about competitive advantage that's created in countries through other factors, labor cost, availability of other materials and supply. Not every single country should create its own downstream economy, because it's just not competitive. Some countries are in some areas and others are not. So it has to be more nuanced than closing the export or doing this. I think Indonesia has been very successful in that particular commodity. Of course, prices have helped quite a bit. But
price will be the key.
Price will be the key.
Well, if the price wouldn't be this high, probably the appetite is not there.
Yeah.
You know, that was what Tesla exactly told Indonesia. You know, they came. My president was in Boca Rica last week. So if Tesla came with 500,000 cars, you know, I think we solved the puzzle. Because why they came? Because BVD of China is there, LG Chemical of Korea is there, and there is no way for somebody like Tesla not to come. That's the key.
But that's open borders. That is open trade.
Yes,
that is
open investment also.
And that's the fair exchange of goods and services. Anil Agrawal, your thoughts?
No, I'm saying very differently. Today, as you say, the mineral shortage, but it's very important. How do we change the young mind to start up? It costs hardly anything to encourage them, to teach them, go to the universities. Because today, with the artificial intelligence, there's a lot of new technology. You don't have to dig big hole. 70% you get a very certainty. Like an old time when you used to do a heart surgery, you open the heart, blood bath is there. Today, with the microscopic, you can see the computer, you can sort out. Same thing, you can do it with the Mother Earth. So it's very important, how do we encourage our youth, whom they're talking about technology, but this is the technology, how they can, thousands of startup people, they take one drill machine, they sort out, and they should be able to tradable their discovery. Out of 50% will go haywire, they will not discover. 50% will discover, they should be able to trade to the larger company. And that is very, very important. That is change completely. As you said, same thing with the oil. People are talking about oil replacement, and the renewable is coming. You're talking about ethanol being mixed. They're talking 50%. Today, Brazil has done about 20%. So those innovations are happening all the time. I have a feeling in 10 years' time, 30% electricity will come from renewable. There is no question. And renewable need the 8 times more metal than anything. So the metal, what we are changing in this is changing the mind of the people that the mineral and the mining is not a bad word. That is what the crisis has come, because it has gone into the hand of a big people, my daughter, my son. If you say this is mining, they're not very comfortable. How do we change that? It is very important. We can't live without mineral.
No, and we want advancement, we want technological advancement, we want progress, but we want it without, without destroying the earth.
No question. There is today's time. You cannot set up any kind of mineralization, whether it's in Peru, whether it's Indonesia. What is happening every day? Things are getting better, and the new discovery which is coming is absolutely flawless. Zero discharge, zero air emission. We can't live. The whole concept was coming that the technology advancement has to be used into the mineral, into the below the ground. What Minister has said, the processing to be done into the developing country. I fully agree that they hold the technology, they want to produce and then take the material, process it, and send it back to us. So this is a very big challenging.
No, it's absolutely enormous. Back to Slido, if we can, and just in terms of your belief in what the world is particularly short of at the moment, there is a great question on Slido, which will emerge very, very shortly.
See it anymore.
Exactly. It's too far away. We need binoculars for middle-aged people at the front of the room. Those are questions. If the Slido has got on the commodity shortages. No? Okay, well, take the questions in anyway. That's fine. Supply and demand. I really am struggling to see see those questions so far away. Supply and demand is always a balance. Given the mining industry to develop the resources fast enough, what is the impact? What is the impact demand destruction?
Yeah.
There we go. For electrification. Thank you, Mr. Zimbabwe. Let's put that one to you, Benedict.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, absolutely. There will be some demand destruction until the industry is able to produce these materials faster and cheaper. But again, the portion in the total value of the ultimate end product, be this an electric vehicle, the portion of these new energy materials or these new materials is actually very small. Again, let's take your example of the electric vehicle. It's a $100,000 car, right? The battery inside is maybe $6,000, $8,000, $9,000. So it actually doesn't matter if the price goes up by 30%. You just have to increase the price of the car by $1,000. So it actually doesn't really move the dial as much as people might think. It's slightly different when it comes to large infrastructure projects. Sure. Charging infrastructure, for example, for electric vehicles is a massive problem because you need enormous amounts of copper and you need it in the ground. So I think you'll see probably more need for government subsidization for those large infrastructures. And when we talk about carbon capture and storage, for example, which again for me is also a technology that is part of the energy transition, you will need a lot of materials, and you will not be able, with pure market mechanisms, be able to deploy that investment with a reasonable return for the regular investor. So we're going to see probably more government subsidies on the demand side, but prices, they can't fall if the cost is going up, the cost of ESG is going up. You have to go to more difficult countries as an industry which have higher cost and higher risks that needs reward for the investors. The price can only go up in the long term.
The cost of ESG, Arantxa.
Yeah, I was looking at the question that we see on the screen, which is fragmentation of markets, and that's ESG is part of that fragmentation of markets. I think on the fragmentation of markets, I agree, fragmentation is no good for trade, and commodity markets need trade. Excuse me for insisting on this. The international economy needs trade, and for that we need rules of the game. The more we keep trade open, the better it will be for a proper allocation of the commodity markets. But there is the other fragmentation that comes from ESG rules that are coming in a multitude of forms from a multitude of sources. And I think part of connecting better investments with investees is making sure we organize a bit better the ESG space. The attractiveness that Anil was asking for will come from investors that see in that investment a sustainability return. Yes. And for that, we need to fix ESG, because today, in my view, ESG disparity, diversity, multiplicity is a barrier to investment.
And every geography and every company and every individual and every government is choosing which bits it would like more than others. And there isn't a uniform global view on what this should be.
There is no global ESG regulator. Now, maybe we don't need a global ESG regulator, but what we need is to organize the ESG market, quote unquote, a little bit better than it is today.
Do we need an ESG regulator? Benedict, I think you might faint the idea of another regulator, but do we need, how do we define what ESG should be so that at least there is a level playing field around the world?
Do you want to take that question?
Well, sure. You know, see, the problem is like this. The consumer, they try not to pay. For producer, they have to somehow factor in, especially for investor. You know, so then this is an equilibrium that has not been solved right now. But countries like mine, we have a commitment, because I think we have the opportunity because of these high prices. You know, right now, what we are trying to do, Mr. Agwal, is I need to produce, because we have abundance of bauxite. We need to develop what we call green aluminum.
Yes.
You know, and to do that is to develop our hydro capacity. Why do we have to build that? For Indonesia, because we can. Half a year of Indonesian climate is rain, and we have more rain now. So why we have to do it? Because we can. So then, right now, if we have to do it not because we want to comply with the ESG, but we feel like this is an opportunity, and because of that, we want to jump in first. Then we will dictate in the future on how this ESG market will be run. We are looking at the opportunity of carbon credit. It's not there yet. You know, countries like mine are producing at $5. You know, come to Europe, it's $50. But we see the difference. You know, but one of these days, the equilibrium will come, and I need to make sure that Indonesia at the forefront of that. So, environmentally, economically, and the most important is technologically, we will lead.
And that's maybe just to build on that. I think it's an important point is you said the consumer doesn't want to pay for ESG. It's a table stake, right? So everyone expects companies to be compliant, but there's a significant cost to be ESG compliant. Yes. At the moment, that's carried by investors and shareholders and the companies themselves. For example, one of the pieces of work we do for the global battery lines is the so-called battery passport, right? So it's a digital tool that tracks the greenhouse gas emissions of an energy storage systems from end to end, right? So you can tell that lithium comes from here, it was treated that way. The nickel will come from Indonesia based on hydropower or not. So the consumer will have a choice. In the absence of those kind of tools, consumers don't have a choice. And they don't understand that this product was actually a lot more expensive to produce than that one because it was compliant and this one was not. And I think if we start to give consumers a choice and we force the downstream industries to be cognizant of the cost of ESG to the upstream part, I think we're going to see a shift in behavior, and you're going to see a tiering in pricing as well for products. Because to make a green mobile phone is a lot more expensive than make a regular mobile phone.
Absolutely. Minister, how's Peru dealing with ESG? Is it high up on your agenda?
Sorry?
Is ESG a big issue in Peru?
Well, we're following the global standards, and we are incorporating this in the economic policy. And overall, if we want to be a part of the OECD, we need to follow these standards. I will take the question about if this rise in commodities is a supply drive.
Sure.
Well, first of all, I think we can divide the commodities. First, the hard commodities and the soft commodities. In case of food, it's driven by the bad weather condition, and on the top of this, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that raised the price of fertilizer. So this has affected the provision of food, and that's why we have an important increase in wheat and corn and so on. On the other side, we have, for example, the decarbonization trend in the world. So it demands more copper, more lithium, and this trend is more sustainable in the long term. I think that in the short term we have a supply-driven rise in food that affect in the short terms overall the most vulnerable sector of population. In the case of Peru, we have coped this with measures that focus on these short terms using the income that provides the rise in copper. So we had this balance in economic policy, but overall we have the crisis of Ukraine and Russia is added at a crisis on top of the crisis. And according to the new forecast, the world will be decreasing in 1% in average around the world.
I mean, is it a supply-driven issue, or is it a trade constraint, Anil?
No, one thing, ESG implementation will reduce the cost. Trust me, it's a question of time. Renewable energy is going to be the cheapest energy possible. Hydro energy is going to be the cheapest energy possible. It is a new thing we are embracing. We are going through the transition. It cannot happen overnight. All the waste comes out of the mineral. There is waste into the waste to the wealth. 100%. Whether all the infrastructure being made is proven, whether it's a bauxite or whether it's a copper, whether it's anything, everything can be used, recycled. And time to come is waste to wealth. And if you put theoretically, you will find ESG implementation is reducing cost.
And to Benedict's earlier point, 17% of minerals are being recycled, and there isn't a huge opportunity. Right, you're making notes furiously. What notes are you making?
Well, I make the note very much to Anil's point that sustainability means competitiveness. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Now, of course, in the short term, there's going to be adjustment.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is coordinate better. To Benedict's point, we need on ESG better data, more transparency, and a convergence of a lot of private standards that in reality are variations of the same. So if we foster greater market transparency and better data on ESG, in the medium to long term, I was making a note, sustainability means competitiveness, to Anil's point.
Yeah.
And today the digital time, and digital time going to transform the world. The way you don't have to dig out, you can definitely develop transparent manner. And it's all the attitude, the young people which is coming, they can do wonder.
If governments want to encourage more foreign resource investment, isn't it better to maintain stable terms rather than taking steps such as banning exports? Minister, a question from the floor.
Well, I did that. I've been doing this for quite some time. I did that, and it doesn't work. It didn't work, okay? So then they did it in the past like that, and it follows like that, okay? And because of that, we see that the opportunity comes maybe only once or twice in our lifetime. And this is Indonesia's time. And we will be disciplined with that, and we will create value addition for that, because we don't want to be one day, wake up in the morning, we have nothing to sell and a lot of things to pay. This is like bad management of your cash flow or your credit card bills every month. So this is something that we're trying to do. And because of that, maybe it's difficult for everyone to say it, but to say different otherwise, that government should just let everybody export and create the value somewhere else, it's just the same arguments on the way around.
Okay. Commodity markets are global markets. The fragmentation creates risks. Will we see a move to more fragmented economic systems? It certainly seems to be, Arantxa, what is playing out in the world right now.
Yeah, what we face is a big geopolitical competition. China on one side, the US on the other side, that could end up exacerbating fragmentation of the global economy with different standards, with different rules, with different sets of incentives that, in my view, would be bad for global markets. And commodities are a global market. So, in my view, we better invest in international cooperation, multilateral rules of the game that will provide a more stable level playing field where everyone can play to its own comparative advantages.
Understand?
I'm on the contrary. For a country like mine, this is an opportunity, because then everybody's looking for a different side, a different take. If this is not happening right now, a country like Indonesia cannot progress. I agree. Theoretically, it's like that. As a trade minister, I have to say that's the case. But as an empirical situations, as we go, and I've been doing this since 2005, okay? So I saw the difference, the competition of two countries' sphere of influence actually creating opportunity for somebody like mine. Not necessarily to him, but to me, it's an opportunity.
Benedict?
No, it does create opportunities for our industry, because volatility and resource nationalism creates higher prices. Because what happens when there's resource nationalism, people start hoarding material somewhere in their supply chain. And you add to that all the supply chain disruptions we have today. When it's used to take a month to get something from Africa to China, it now takes 6 months. So we've got 6 months of production frozen somewhere on a ship. Right? So everyone starts to generate more strategic stockpiles. The only country that actually has a material strategic stockpile today is China, which is the SRB. Right? We believe that in the next few years we're going to see a lot more of those national stockpiles of critical materials, hoarding material and extracting it from the global supply chain and increasing prices that way. And it's actually, in the long term, it's a good mechanism if these stockpiles are released in the case of a fly-up of prices and they're being taken back when prices drop. So it can have a stabilizing effect, but we're not seeing that. There's just not enough of it.
Yeah, but let's replace iron ore by rice. What if the iron ore that you want to sit on today to build your downstream value-added industry is somebody else's rice that is not exported to feed your population? So this also, view has also its own limitations. So all I'm saying is that in the long term, we would be better off if we have a less fragmented international market, because at the end of the day, you produce, but then you also have to sell, and selling to constituency that have different rules of the game would also impose costs on you. So fragmentation is no good in the long term.
But the world has divided into, a democratic country and the non-democratic country. That is, when non-democratic country has no rule. If they have to push something, they go flood the market, they can do what they want. They don't take people's consent. You take the China, you take the Russia, you take the Middle East, they will do what suits them. And this is a very different, and it has to be fragmented, because what democratic country
the democratic country does the same thing.
Yeah.
They do the same thing. They call it differently, but they do the same thing. Exactly. I mean, do you think the US not doing it? They're doing it.
And your example of vaccines earlier is
they're doing
point,
it.
Yes.
And just to say, in multilateral trading system, to me, this is going to be a fine new equilibrium. Okay, there need to be a reform, Madam Professor. in these things, and I told everyone, right now, it's not working. And this situation's right now giving a benefit for countries like mine. But in the long run, I agree. How do we reform this multilateral system? For example, I told everyone, maybe we should introduce the introductions of voting at WTO. Otherwise, that's not going to happen. Indonesia is chairing the G20, and the trade minister will be in September. I told everyone, and I wrote everyone, that I'm going to do this at the Komodo Dragon Islands. I don't know if you knew this Komodo dragon. These beasts eat people, okay?
Poisons them.
Poisonous. So I told everyone, if trade ministers cannot get something out of this thing, I'm going to leave these trade ministers with the dragon, and let them deal with it, because there is nothing happening at trade. And this is the fragmentations. We don't want to say it, but we're facing it. And based on what's my national interest. So then, we don't want to say it, we don't want to feel it, but we're facing it. And right now, the fragmentations is getting wider and wider.
And it's part of a much bigger debate here at Davos on globalization and whether globalization is dead or not. Globalization is clearly, I think, readjusting to a more nationalistic decade ahead, perhaps, while we get a realignment of global interests. Minister?
Yeah. It's not only fragmentation in supply terms, because it's driven by geostrategic, political reasons. And I don't want to, it's not my specialty, the time of politics, but after this conflict in Ukraine and Russia, the world will be different.
Yeah.
We expect, a fragmentation not only by supplies reason, but also by a new strategic distribution around the world. And it affects, of course, the trade.
I recall a discussion with David Blunkett in 2008, and I said to him, what's going to be the consequence of the global financial crisis? And he said, well, in the next decade or two, you're going to see a fragmentation of the world. And that's what's playing out now. What, therefore, is the consequence of what is happening in the world right now a decade hence? Who would like to give me a view on that?
It's happening.
It's happening. What is the consequence? It's happening. What is the consequence? A decade from now, what are our kids inheriting?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we have to come back to trade. I think trade has shown in the history that it creates prosperity and fight poverty. And because we are more democratic than we ever before, this is also a driver that we're going to be in the more stable situations. But until then, this has to happen. Until then, this all unregulated things needs to happen. So for one thing, we will see at MC12 in Geneva next month, can we behave and be realistic about this? If we cannot, these things will be prolonged on how we're going to solve it. But I truly believe in the long run, trade will generate at least 3% of world growth. And because of that, everyone has to comply and contribute to the system.
Comply and contribute to which system, though? We've got it's a divisive world. It's a divided world. We've agreed on that, and that's the problem with multilateralism, I suppose.
If you listen right now, among the free country and less free country, the less free country is more capitalist than the free country. So we are going to get into equilibrium. Okay. We will get there. Different driver, different avenue, but we will get there. When? The sooner that we behave, the better. So I'm going to start at G20 in Labuan Bajo with this Komodo dragon. If I cannot do it, I don't know who can.
Arantxa, I mean, you look deeply uncomfortable. With the way in which the world may be moving.
No. I mean, I am lucid. I'm comfortable. I'm lucid that we've got a global trading system with rules that we've built among all of us that includes basically 98% of world's international trade, that it's imperfect and it's insufficient, and I agree very much with the Minister that the rules of the game need to be improved, and they need to be improved for a start because they are not very good at capturing what's driving globalization today, which is technology.
Yep.
The rules of international trade have not been adapted to take on board the revolutions at the technology level, digitalization, electronic commerce, that today is a huge part of international trade. They don't capture very well export restrictions. And yet we have seen what export restrictions have done to certain commodity markets in the area of food. So we have to improve this system, but what I fear is that it's going to be very difficult to improve this system in a geopolitical power context that is leading to fragmentation. And what I'm saying, and I keep saying it because this is what economists, this is the hard laws of economics. You know, we politicians can talk whatever we want, but there is the hard law of economics.
It's an uncomfortable decade ahead. Would anybody agree, disagree?
Yeah, I think I'm very optimistic that 10 years later, the world is going to be very different. The age of the people is going, people are more healthier. The women empowerment will be huge. Women empowerment will take big position. As I said, the ESG will be compliant for sure. Half of the energy will come from renewable energy. We call it hydro, anything you talk about. With the digital transformation, the whole thing will be very different. The automobile, the housing, digital. I look at the digital education. You don't have to build big building. You know, I'm looking that from the house, housewife can develop the website and the software, can electronically transfer. 10 years will be completely revolutionized. I was hoping that because of this Ukraine war, I thought the war is outdated. I always thought in my mind, the war is outdated. This was 100 years back, 50 years back, we used to think like this. But this has changed my mind completely, that everybody now, I started suspecting China, India, everybody's suspecting something. But I feel the world is going to be a better world.
Okay, a better world, mostly because driven by your daughter, who tells you truths perhaps that not many other people can tell you. Let's wrap up.
Can I?
Okay, I'll wrap up with your daughter in a moment. Benedict.
So when I said at the beginning that I think we're at the beginning of a super cycle, is exactly because of that, because we have all these ambitions that we want to achieve, 50% green energy, revolutionary types of mobility, cloud, everything on the cloud, right? It's all wonderful, but we have to produce millions and millions of tons of material as an industry, more than has ever been produced in the history of the world. In an environment that's increasingly fragmented, in a world that's increasingly politically and economically fragmented, try to operate a global company with 20, 15, 30 locations in a world that is so multipolar. It is very difficult. So that's why I believe we're about to see a supply shock that will not be able to satisfy all these ambitious targets that we have in terms of the green energy transition.
But are we better off as a world dependent on resources a decade from now, or are we still feeling the reverberations of these shocks that you're anticipating?
That's a big question. I believe it will take longer than 10 years for the world to adjust to this. It will be more a 30-year journey than anything.
Okay.
Look, it's at the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century, when the energy system moved to the hydrocarbon economy. I mean, that was an upheaval comparable to what we are seeing today. So the energy transition is only comparable to that part of the Industrial Revolution. And that took 30, 40 years to adjust. So I think that's more a question of a generation.
People are frightened of change. People don't like change. They find change uncomfortable. But it doesn't have to be that, I don't think. Can we wrap up with that as the thought and then send everybody off to the next sessions? Minister, let's start with you.
So I'm going to say this. I'm on the contrary with Benedict, but I truly believe that this is a process of where everyone is getting more efficient. This is the survival of the fittest. If you don't get more efficient, you will be left behind, okay? And because of that, it's true, hydrocarbon economy is 40 years. For Indonesian to change from combustion engine car, we took 50 years to grow up about 2 million today, and we're gonna change at least 1 million car by 2030. So that will be the revolutions.
A brief thought from you, Benedict, as we wrap up?
Well, I hope you'll use a lot of cobalt and nickel in those.
Nickel, cobalt, and we have double.
Minister. Mr. Graham.
Well, the last emergency generated by the COVID-19 has shown us that some innovations and adaptation could take time, but in emergency times, we as a human race adapt very, very, very quickly.
We adapt. We do adapt. We do. Arantxa.
Resilience to manage the transition. Start today taking resilience measures that will help you manage this generational journey that we will have to undertake.
Last word, Anil.
I have, for me, the biggest thing which comes to is Africa. You see the change in Africa, what happened. 53, 54 countries, they will transform. They are getting educated. They are getting better. They are being democratic. So that is a great hope. The India. So these are the things which I'm looking forward. 10 years. I'm a little impatient, so I want to see these changes in my lifetime.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, please will you thank you.